The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Very good evening, dear participants. A very warm welcome to each and every one of you who have spared precious time to log into this session as part of the NHRDN Mind Matters initiative. We trust that you have been a part of the various sessions that we have been organizing for all of the participating organizations since morning. This is the third session for the day. This is a quick glimpse of the organizations that have come on board for this very valuable, noble initiative, a movement as we choose to call it. A quick peek into what is in store for organizations who have signed up in terms of the toolkit that is being offered to them, right from specially curated communication kits for management to help with drafting a mental health policy in case you don't have one in place already, to resource person list for employee assistance programs are some of the offerings of this particular initiative. There is also a special sanction that we have a collaboration with LinkedIn, where we are able to offer courses for organizations who are enrolled as part of this initiative. These are details of the LinkedIn courses that are available. Specific courses which you can unlock for a duration of 24 hours from the time that you access it are available for anyone who may be keen to use it without any additional cost. This is a quick glimpse of what to expect in course of this entire week. Like I had mentioned earlier, we are on the third session of day one of the NHRDN Mind Matters initiative, and we have a whole lot of action planned for you, if we may call it that way. We would urge you to visit the nationalhrd.org website and the Mind Matters page there to register for any of these sessions that you might find useful, and do help spread the word. A few quick ground rules before we begin the session today. We will opt to keep your lines muted to ensure that the proceedings do not get disturbed. You may, however, raise your hand in case you have a question. You could alternatively type in questions in the question window, and we will try and attempt them towards the end of the session, time permitting. There will also be a feedback form that we will share at the end of the session. Please do share your views. It will greatly help us in ensuring that our offerings are more in line with the requirement. You will also see that there is a handout that we have placed for you. Do ensure that you take a look at this as we proceed with the session, and at the end of it, you will find this useful. Before we introduce the speakers for the day, let me take a moment to introduce the moderator for today's session. This is Dr. Sujata Sriram, who is a professor at the School of Human Ecology at TIS, Tata Institute of Social Sciences. She teaches courses on psychology, research methods, human development, and so on for students at TIS. She is on the National Executive Board of the Association for Early Childhood Education and Development, or AECED, which is primarily an advocacy network that works for children below the age of 8 years. She's a member of the International Stress Management Association. And I must add that she is an extremely warm and eternally curious, as she calls herself, person who genuinely wants to make a difference to a lot of these areas that she's interested in. She's researched in areas around families, childcare and planning, marriage, divorce, mental health and well-being, of course, which is why she's here, and so on. So as I hand over to Dr. Sriram to introduce our very esteemed speakers for the day, Havovi and Smernima, I hope and we are sure that you will have a wonderful, rewarding session in store for you. Over to you, Dr. Sriram.
Thank you, Nisha. I think before I start, I will like to thank NHRDN, of course, for organizing this event, because I think it's probably one of the first times that the issue of mental health is going to be discussed in such detail for an audience which doesn't really usually concern itself with mental health issues. So that said, there are also two people who I would like to really thank, who are Nisha, of course, and the other person who's in charge of the tech, that's Avinash. I think a lot of what we have today would not be possible without Avinash, who's been the one who's really organized all our tech. A little bit about what we're going to be discussing in the session today. We're going to be looking at issues of suicide and self-harm, so aspects of suicide prevention. Now, some of the things that we might be discussing here may be of concern for people. So if anything really distresses you, please don't hesitate to turn off from the session, because we really don't want to cause unnecessary distress to anybody. Okay. Now, why are we talking about suicide and self-harm? Some of the things that we need to recognize, which were brought up in the first session as well, which I'm just going to be reiterating, relate to the fact that both suicide and self-harm today are growing public health concerns. They're global public health concerns. And India happens to have the dubious distinction of having the largest number of suicides in Southeast Asia. This is using 2016 data estimates. India's suicide rate was 16.5 suicides per 100,000 people. Okay, this is according to the NCRT data. India also has the third highest female suicide rate in the world after Lesotho and the Republic of Korea. Every year, 800,000 people commit suicide in the world, okay, every year. Suicide claims more deaths than malaria or cancer. And the other statistic that we need to remember is 50% of the suicides are of people below the age of 45. Again, another sad, scary statistic is the fact that 90% of adolescents who kill themselves are from low and middle income countries. Student suicides in India have been consistently high. Every day, there are 28 student suicides in India. There have been 10,159 students who died by suicide in 2018, which is an increase over 2017 and 2016. And these figures don't tell us anything about the silent numbers who've attempted suicide, who have contemplated the same. For the young in India, the ratio of completed to attempted suicides is about 1:15, which tells us a little bit about the enormity of the problem. Now, apart from suicide, it's also important for us to recognize aspects of self-harm, which is the deliberate injuring of the self, often with objects, in order to cope with anxiety and stress. It can, in extreme cases, lead to suicide. It's not a new phenomenon, but we have, over the years, seen many more young people reaching out for help. Now, that helping me set the context, let me introduce the speakers. We have two psychologists and therapists who've had many years of experience. The first speaker is Havubi Bhagwagar. She's a psychologist and a psychotherapist with over 20 years of experience as a clinical practitioner. She has her own independent venture called Manashni in Mumbai. She has multiple trainings that she's been working on. There are multiple things that she works on aspects of mental health. Her practice involves providing treatment to clients with mood disorders, anxiety disorders, grief, adult survivors of abuse and neglect, multiple areas. Along with Havubi, we have Swarnima Bhargava, who is a clinical psychologist. She primarily uses ideas from narrative therapy and solution-focused therapy in her work. She's completed an MPhil in clinical psychology in the Institute of Human Behavior and Applied Sciences in Delhi. And she has been practicing from 2011. And her work has largely focused on concerns of children, families, young adults. And along with her practice, she also teaches at the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai. where she essentially works with training students on topics of psychology and psychotherapy. So today's discussion, today's format is more in terms of a discussion that we're going to be having with Swarnima and Hovovi, looking at some of the issues that are there. We, again, from the audience, we welcome you to put in your questions in the question box. But now let's, I think, get started. So Hovovi, over to you. So what, according to you, contributes to the very high suicide rate among the young in India? What do you see as the risk factors?
Hi, first of all, thank you for having me on this platform. It's a wonderful opportunity to reach out to so many on topics such as these. So to answer your question, I think we are looking at very high rates of student stress in the youth. And even this year, despite the competitive entrance exams having to be cancelled because of the COVID-19 pandemic, they were still held. And there are 4 NEET aspirants that we know that have died by suicide this year itself. The numbers haven't been recorded, but they are very, very high from what we can make out. At least anecdotally, between last year and this year, we know that the rates of suicide possibly are double or even more than that. So youth suicide is a huge concern for our country. But I think, unfortunately, it's not spoken about as much as it should be. And neither are interventions there at the level that they should be, neither in colleges nor, even there are some colleges where students go in India to study that are often on the outskirts of cities. And we know that the availability of mental health care there is less, but the availability of substances there for abuse are huge. So this ratio itself should tell us how little we are paying attention to the youth in our country. And apart from the obvious academic pressure, there are a lot of things that the youth today are facing. Perhaps the first thing, actually, there's an eye-opening study that I read some time back, which says that this was the 2017 WHO study talking about parental involvement. So supposedly we think that Indian parents are a hugely helicopter kind of parents who are constantly hovering around their kids. But that study shows that across the last decade, that whole dynamic has changed. Parental involvement in India, as reported by students, is much lesser than in other Southeast Asian countries. And that in itself tells us that's one of the reasons. At this point of time, with technology coming in at the rate and the speed at which it's coming in, and the parental involvement reducing, students, the youth, are often left to their own devices, to manage life, literally. There's no intervention from the elders in the family because they don't understand how it operates, how the technology world operates. So that's one huge source of stress not addressed. We have some pockets of work happening around, maybe responsible usage of technology for the parents, not for the children, because parents just say that the answer to everything is take the device away from the child. Now, we are in a place where, or we are stuck in, I think, this huge problem where the generation of parents have very little understanding of technology and the kids are doing everything on technology. This gap, I think, is a huge reason for why children feel neglected. Possibly the area is unexplored. And that's a huge stress that finally leads to these, suicides related to social media.
So I think, Hovovi, you've touched on multiple things. So I think from what I hear, it's related with academic pressure. Then you're talking about family pressure. You're talking about isolation, especially in case of colleges which are located at the outskirts of cities, where again there is, so you're bringing in the issue of substance use as well. And also this new aspect that's coming in of Indian parents not being as involved with their children as maybe we used to be, or as is documented. Because one of the things that comes up is that Indian parents are supposed to be over-involved. Swarnima, would you want to add to that? And also maybe if you could look at, working age youth as well, working age young adults as well.
I think a lot of it also starts with schools and how much schools give importance to mental health in terms of having a school counselor available about being able to diagnose, disorders in children like attention deficit disorder or specific learning disorder, which really impact the way children learn and the way they're able to participate in education, the way their peer relationships would be, the way the reputation they would have in school with teachers. And often a lack of this awareness, not just in the student body or the parent body, but also in the management, the teachers, kind of isolate some children who are not doing as well academically. And, unfortunately, we now see that children have a lot of pressure on them, not just about studying, but also pressure to be very popular, have a lot of friends, pressure to participate in sports or extracurricular activities, theater, music, to also have a particular body type. So there's increasing pressure on children to be cool and to perform in multiple areas of life and all at the same time. So I think
and do well in all of them.
And do well in all of them, absolutely. So I think this creates a lot of pressure amongst children, which doesn't get really addressed by families who are maybe too busy with both parents working, with grandparents maybe not living with the children. And in school, everything is really driven towards academics, particularly in the board classes. And this also spills over when you reach college or when you reach work, because that competition about that college seat, or then the competition about those campus placements, is as intense and as challenging. And I think, unfortunately, we have, as a society, put all our elements of worth on how much somebody is able to achieve. So in terms of what marks you get or what is the campus placement that you get. So I think that, creates an increasing kind of a funnel where there are very few opportunities that we consider worthy that are open to young people today. And without access to medical care, with a lot of access to substances, I think, all these factors just work together and create very, dangerous situations for children.
So as I mentioned, we have this very high numbers of suicide in this 15 to 45 age group. And a lot of what you said essentially would, I could look at, in this 15 to say maybe 21, 22. But what about that next set, okay, this 22 to 45, which is actually also equally vulnerable in the Indian context, because we have a number of cases of suicide that, we've heard of in these groups. And, my other question, it's also my self-doubt that comes in terms of how realistic are these numbers? Do these numbers really tell us enough? Are there, the hidden numbers that are there which we just don't know about?
Actually, sorry, I'm just talking.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the NCRB numbers, Dr. Sriram, are half the numbers of what the WHO finds. The WHO says there are 250,000 deaths by suicide in a year. The NCRB finds that it's only 150,000 because we go by the police data. Now, we have to know that many of them,
unreported cases.
Because parents don't want to report the youth dying. Yeah. First, they don't want to take onus when the youth is depressed in the house. So if they don't go to work for several days at a go, and the youth is unmarried, then the solution to that is get married. The solution is not let's get mental health care for the youth. Then when the youth takes his or her life, then that is covered up. It's not even put in the police record. So we honestly are not looking at the correct figures. So when we don't even know what the reasons are, how do we explore where to even begin starting to find solutions? So I think
I think the other thing is that when you talk about this age group, the other really alarming finding is that majority of the completed suicides in this age group are women, particularly married women, according to the data. So I think that also says a lot about the social factors and the systemic factors at play, about how we value women. Things like, women getting married early, having arranged marriages, not having consent for marriage, early motherhood, not access to economic independence, maybe dowry-related harassment at home. I think, again, there are lots of factors that work together that create women particularly as a very vulnerable group here. Then the other things are, I think, economic factors, or the responsibility on an individual to not just support themselves, but also support a young family. And given this economic climate, especially I think since March, since COVID-19 has taken off, with so many people who've lost their jobs or who feel insecure about, retaining a job, I think those situations have also just increased the pressure that people,
So,
young
can
adults
you
are feeling.
elaborate on that, Swarnima, first? I mean, how has COVID-19 really contributed to thoughts of suicide and self-harm? I think that's something I would really like to know more about, because there have been more suicides reported. I think at least, we do hear about people who are attempting suicide, where there are more cases of completed suicides, and it's come out because of COVID. Can we say directly that COVID-19 has contributed to suicide?
Absolutely. So I think it's not just the pandemic and the lockdown to kind of help reduce the numbers of the pandemic. Both have been highly disruptive about our normal ways of living, what we do for recreation, how we celebrate festivals, how we socialize with each other, what we do over the weekends, what our work-life balance has been. I think all those factors have really contributed to either an increased sense of pressure on people, where the boundary between what's work timing and what's time to relax or time to do, chores at home or to spend time with your family, that has really blurred those boundaries. And a lot of times people are also facing, cuts. So even if you're retaining your job, a lot of industries have cut salaries, cut benefits, cut bonuses, delayed promotions. So a lot of things that people have worked for in 2019 and were looking forward to in 2020 have unfortunately also been, swept away. And this, we're talking maybe mostly about the white collar professions. Not to mention, a lot of news articles had also come about people who, belonging to the migrant sector, the laboring sector, who, died by suicide because there wasn't enough ration at home. There wasn't enough money. So there are also instances of men taking their lives because of the shame of not being able to provide for their families. There are instances where people have taken their lives because they're afraid of passing on the illness. If they've tested COVID positive, they're afraid of passing it on to the family. So I think COVID-19 has definitely made mental health a very important necessity, something that's really important to talk about this year, and I think definitely in the coming year as well.
Yeah.
So, you want to add on to that?
Yeah, I agree completely with what Swarnima is saying, that when the pandemic started, at that point, there was a prediction that perhaps the deaths by suicide will increase, but nobody predicted or anticipated it would be this bad. And of course, with the latest, reports around mental health and suicide after the actor's death, these numbers have inflated even further. They have become much more, in your face. You can't turn anywhere without information about suicide flowing, onto your screen, either through your phone or TV or anywhere. We do know that some research was conducted, and I'm quite surprised not much has been done after May. But up till May, whatever data they had collected, they did find that a lot of deaths due to COVID were reported by people who were scared of getting the infection or may have got it and then got scared. Now, of course, with the changes that are happening medically and the fact that people are having access to medical care, that fear has reduced. We can see it all around us. But now the economic crisis is looming, or is there in our face today, and that is what is being reported. At least anecdotally, I'm hearing it in the sessions. There would be a very rare session I'd have in the day where people are not talking about fear of axe on their head about their job going. And they're giving me reports of how people in their companies are being told to take sabbaticals, which is kind of a never return back to work kind scenario, or sort of a hint. And then if that's happening to the person next to them, how do they know it won't happen to them? So they're having sleep trouble, they're having difficulty about paying their basic daily sustenance. And then, of course, when we're talking about the labor class, the unorganized sector, there the horror stories are even worse than we can even imagine. and many haven't even come to light. But it is something which we will have to take very seriously across the next year. Concerns around deaths by suicide.
You mentioned the death of the actor. Let's name him Sushant Singh Rajput. Does the press need to be more responsible with the way in which it reports on suicide? I mean, we have the case of Sushant Singh Rajput here, but it's every time. I mean, when you talk of, say, the suicides of the students in Kota, the kind of hullabaloo that is there in the way in which the press reports suicide. Does the press need to be more responsible about the way they report on suicide?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. No,
please go ahead.
I think I lost the connection a bit.
Yeah, so I think it's, as a mental health professional, it's quite horrific to see the sensationalizing in the media about the way particularly this incident has been reported and the amount of time and attention given to this one incident over many others. And, there are photographs which have leaked, which have been circulated on WhatsApp and social media. And, all of this is extremely, I can't imagine what it's like for the family or the loved ones of the individual. But for people who have faced any kind of trauma, who have contemplated suicide, who are working through those issues in therapy, who have a family member, a friend who has died by suicide, it can be freshly triggering. And since it's in the news, it's everywhere. It's on your social media, it's on TV, it's on the radio, it's everywhere. So it's very hard to create pockets of safety or to, encourage our clients who are now struggling, who've been triggered by this information, to find ways of still socializing, engaging with loved ones without, this news kind of being shoved in their faces.
So what would the press need to do in terms of reporting it more responsibly, to use the word?
I mean, personally, I would think just empathy, that if this was somebody who was your loved one or your family member or your friend, how would you want to hear this news, first of all? Would you want to see images? Would you want random speculation about why they did it or who's responsible? Or would you want the news to keep the dignity and the privacy of the family in mind? Would you want them to be slightly more sensitive? Maybe not share not share details about how the action was committed, leading to maybe copycat suicides or people imitating
on that point of copycat suicides, we'll come to that.
Sure.
However, what would you like to say about this thing about the press reporting on suicides, especially with this aspect of, I think it makes front page stories.
So June 14th, when this incident happened, the media outbreak was just phenomenal. Twitter actually just got stormed by on one hand, the media putting all kinds of stuff up, including government agencies, and then on the other hand, a group of activists trying to put the press on the right track because we expect the copycat suicides to have happened. Now, the WHO has released 6 to 7 very specific points to the press, which has been circulated over and over and over to the Indian press. How many times, possibly as many times as they report, there will be somebody who's telling them not to report things in that manner. First is don't have these stories on the front pages. By the way, all those 7 points have been violated over and over and over. Multiple times. There is no ethics involved. Every single norm that the WHO has laid down has been just flouted. So,
it's not
one
just
of the things
newspapers, I think it's also TV channels. I think 24/7 News, I think, is also responsible for a lot of the violations.
24/7 News, and also I don't know how, I've never seen the kind of WhatsApp leak of chats ever, anytime, the way I saw it portrayed on TV this time. It was bizarre, it was stark. And one cannot imagine what kind of an impact that's going to have on a vulnerable mind watching that. And, to see that kind of material being put forward is very scary for somebody who has already, who is in a place where these thoughts cross their mind every day from the time they wake up. Their only thought is, am I going to finish this day or not? For such a vulnerable mind to keep viewing information like this, personal details about the actor, his psychiatric history, the medications he took or he didn't take, his prescriptions, yeah, with the names of the medications, which I have never seen done. So every time this would come out into the press, I knew that when a therapy session happens that day, the client is going to ask me why this particular medication was given to me or prescribed to me. What is the reason? Is it the same? Is it going to give me the same effect? Is it going to have side effects of suicide? Because see, for a lay person, they just put 2 and 2 together and make 22. They don't understand that every psychiatrist prescribes a medication in a particular fashion, and that is, of course, not made public. So the press has violated, I feel, all ethics around reporting of suicide in this particular instance.
Is it particularly bad in India, or does it happen internationally as well?
It happens, right? With the Robin Williams case, as you saw, how many copycats did we see after that? It was a huge upsurge. Even after the Kate Spade one, Anthony Bourdain, all of them, there was upsurges in teen deaths, attempts. And we have charts and graphs and figures that have shown the spike.
So, both of you have mentioned the term copycat suicide. What does it mean?
So, Swarnima, yeah.
Swarnima.
I think a copycat suicide is when you see an increase or an uptick in suicide in the same time or the same place as what something has been reported in the media, using the same method of ending their life. So it's literally like a copy of whatever the celebrity or whichever, the media suicide reported has been.
Yeah, great. So it's something that we need to watch out for, and it happens much more when there's been an incident and the press misreports or press
I think the other thing we need to
glorifies certain aspects.
Yes.
Sorry, you were saying?
There was a TV show that had come up a few years ago called 13 Reasons Why.
Reasons Why, yes.
And I think coming back to Havovi's point about parents also being very attuned to what children are watching. So the news is something maybe everybody as a family sees together or has conversations about at the dining table, but shows which are specifically designed for a teen population, which as parents or grown-ups, we may not watch, but where again, there's depiction and valorizing of suicide and almost this sense given that, it was an inevitable action by the protagonist. I think after that, there was a lot of, again, upsurge in teen suicide or attempts, particularly in the US. And even here in India, a lot of young people were very disturbed by, the contents of that TV show. So I think, again, it comes down to monitoring what is the media across the board that our children are consuming.
That's actually very true. Yeah, when a celebrity takes their life by itself, just the act, forget all of the drama that follows afterward, just that act is enough to create a kind of an emotion in a vulnerable mind, let's say a teenage mind, that says that if success is important, then this person who is very successful also can do this. Why do I need to get there? So that's one strain of thought that usually will follow in a vulnerable teen mind, a youth, or even an adult. The other thing that a lot of people think is that the celebrity did it and did it without guilt. So I should not feel guilty about this. And it's okay for me to imitate this method because obviously it's a method that works. Nobody is going to feel bad about it after I go. So, a lot of people convince themselves to take that step primarily because the emotions that hold them back no longer hold them back. That's what is meant by copycat. That's what's meant by vulnerability. That the mind starts turning on its head. And there is enough and more evidence to show that responsible media reporting can actually bring down the rates of suicide. There is enough and more evidence. That's why it's so important.
So let's just bring in the other aspect that this conversation is also about, which is about self-harm. So why do people self-harm? And what does self-harm look like? I'm not sure that many of us know what self-harm looks like. And there's also this new term that, comes up, digital self-harm. So, Swarnima, to you first.
Yeah, I think self-harm is, like you defined it for us in the beginning, a deliberate injury to the body. So it could take the form of typically cutting, scratching, hair pulling, hitting, hurting yourself until you have bruises. In extreme situations, it might lead to, injuries like breaking a bone. And there are multiple reasons why people do it. It could be done to kind of manage intense feelings, that the emotional pain is so strong that I give vent to a physical pain, something which is very visible, which helps translate this unseeable, unknowable emotional pain into something that can be seen, that becomes tangible. And the experience of that physical pain can also numb out the emotional pain that one is feeling.
So it's
The
not
other,
attention seeking.
no, a lot of times,
It's one of the things that's always told. No, it's attention seeking behavior, especially when it comes down to women. Okay, when women, beat themselves, cut themselves.
I think one thing we really need to do is reframe attention seeking as maybe, seeking care or seeking attachment. Why is it so wrong for us to seek attention from each other? Why is it so wrong to seek attention from a family member, a friend, a teacher, a classmate, a colleague? We're all designed to seek attention or seek care when we need it and to provide care to each other. I think that's the bedrock of all human relationships. So somehow just by labeling it attention seeking, it just becomes so minimizing and invalidating to the experience of the other. Where we're saying, you're just doing this for attention. Instead of saying, okay, you're looking for attention, can I provide you that care or that attention? But yeah, so a lot of times people would self-harm and they would try to hide it, or carry out those injuries in places which may not be readily seen, like upper arm or upper thighs, stomach, areas which would otherwise be hidden from view. And it's more about an internal process rather than always, looking for that external attention. Yeah.
So do more women self-harm as compared to men? Sorry.
Oh,
Sorry, I lost it for a bit. Do women self-harm more than men?
Yeah.
There is no data on that, but there is definite data to show that men don't come up and talk about it. And the emerging data on, at least with relation to conditions like borderline personality disorder, where people say self-harm is very high, but of course it's high in various other conditions as well of mental illness. There is more than enough evidence to show it's 50-50, men and women, but it's seen as a women's problem. And that's sad. And when men do types of self-harm, they're not seen as self-harm, it's just seen as, oh, out.
Form of self-harm.
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't seen
Substance is
form of self-harm.
a lot of there's digital self-harm. There are ways in which you can, really harm yourself in a lot of subtle manners. It's always have to show up only as cutting, burning, visible signs. There are subtle signs of self-harm. But of course, if we are talking about self-harm in its purest form, then the idea is to create body harm, because then endorphins flow. Endorphins help us feel good and they relieve pain. So the function of self-harm is typically to make the person feel good, which happens through some body damage or the other in its most technical form, to either feel relief or stop pain or to engage with somebody. As Swarnima said, it's primarily for attachment. It's primarily to reach out and say, hey, look, I'm in pain. That's the function of it.
Let's also look at who our audience is today, largely from the corporate sector. So do corporate organizations need to start discussions on suicide and self-harm? And how do they start it?
Absolutely.
Whoever. Yeah, that's one name.
No, please go ahead.
They do need to start discussions on it. So I'll give an anecdote of something I heard last week. Let's say it happened in September, where an organization was circulated with some suicide flyers and told that, why don't you put these posters up to create awareness, especially since suicide is in the news. But the said organization did not want to use the S word. So they said reframe the flyer without the S word, that is suicide and self-harm. And I feel that's what needs to change. It doesn't have to be couched. It doesn't need to be, fluffed up. It's a word. It's a proper technical word. Suicide is a word. And just like death, it exists. It's a form of death that one has inflicted to themselves. So it has to start with some very straightforward talk. That's first very important. Discussions have to be opened up, especially around suicide. Self-harm is a very, very delicate area. The discussions around that would need a different type of intervention than around, say, suicide. But there are, for example, not many gatekeeper courses being offered in companies. And we have enough and more evidence, say, from the US Air Force, right? Where there was an 80% drop in the rates of suicide in the US Air Force simply because they introduced simple strategies like applauding people when they went to a psychiatrist, actually sending out notes in the organization and memos. Also, making sure that a person who's vulnerable has gone and met a psychiatrist or a healthcare worker. So basic, simple things like that have to be put in place systemically at least. And of course, the discussions have to be normalized. It shouldn't be hush-hushed up. That's important. That's where it starts, the culture of empathy.
So I think we have a few audience questions here, which we can just look at them. So this is one that asks about TV shows that speak of suicide. Should such shows be made or not? That's the first part of the question. The person goes on to ask, because it plays two roles, one of raising awareness and another of raising the numbers of suicides. How do we find a balance here?
So if you look at organizations like the Samaritans, which work in the area of suicide advocacy and awareness building, there are clear guidelines that they have created over years and with research about how to document a televised episode or represent movies in cinema and media. What what to keep in mind about the protagonist, how the event unfolds, how the others in the in the scene respond to it. So I think there is a lot of information like that which is available when it comes to responsible journalism or responsible portrayals in media. And I wish, that more filmmakers would access resources like that, and also that the censor body would access resources like that to make sure that it's not just, violence or nudity that we are censoring, but also sensitivity to social issues that we are being mindful of in media and television.
I also feel, that much like the news channels that are talking about mental health so openly without even calling an expert in to corroborate their stance. Similarly, when something is being talked about, a movie is being made or a series is being made on a mental health issue, are they receiving the support they need from a psychiatrist or a psychologist to guide them in the right direction? They can't just throw terms loosely or make connections between the protagonist's life and their, mental illness and connect these two things and portray it on screen in a way that it doesn't happen in real life. So I think it's very, very important to have a mental health professional with you if you're attempting to make a movie or a series which has some angle of mental illness to it, just as they would take inputs from a surgeon if they are, or from anybody. If they are, they are showing a movie about an athlete, they spend months training under a senior athlete. Why isn't the same done when it comes to mental health? Why does everybody feel they can talk about it any way they like? Yeah. That responsibility is...
When you say talk about it any way they like.
Everywhere, even just with that recent show that had come, Breathe, where they talked about, the way the DID, dissociative identity disorder, they got quite a lot of things right, quite a lot of things wrong. Dear Zindagi, where, the therapist is going for a boat ride with their patient. I don't know the last time Swarnima or myself would have done something like that. So let's get real, guys. That's not what therapy looks like. And then how many people do you correct about this?
There's a trivial to say about when there are shows made on mental health and mental illness. They tend to get trivialized.
When
They
the
don't
13
think,
reasons why, yeah, they don't. The 13 reasons why show, I spoke up about it on so many
yeah.
platforms. I wrote to Netflix along with Midday. We need to stop this show because the contagion is high based on it.
Mm,
But TRPs matter, no?
Mm.
Finally, remember, media runs on TRPs. And even the news channels tried. I would say they tried for four
mm,
or 5 days not to show the actor's suicide. I received information that their TRPs fell, which is why it went back on track. So remember, it goes both ways. We are the audience. We buy that stuff
mm.
and want to see it. The responsibility is two-way. It has to come from us and them. If we also put a stop to the sensationalizing, we stop wanting to see this kind of stuff, we responsibly decide what we want to see, we won't be given all of this as well. It has to be, I think, a twofold effort.
So there's another audience question which I would like to read out. It goes this way. I've been told by a person who self-harms that it's a pain that she has control over. And the pain in her head is so much that she looks for a way to feel something outside of it. Is this a common reason with other people too?
Yes, so self-harm can also be something that the person is doing as a way of coping. And a lot of times, people jump in to say, don't do this, without actually speaking to the person or trying to understand why they're doing this or what purpose this behavior serves for them, or seeking to provide other replacements, other ways of coping. That when you feel the urge to hurt yourself, you come and talk to me, or encouraging the person to go in for therapy to find and develop other healthier ways of coping, where you can manage this pain in your head in other ways, where you can express it in other ways other than hurting your body.
Abhavi?
Yes, oftentimes when the person tries to self-harm, like I said, the idea is that endorphins flow, so they feel something. Most people with self-harm ideation are often the kind of people who are high achievers. They are people with a lot of intense competitive spirit. They want to do really well at things. And because of the mental health issues they're going through, they often can't perform at the level that they need to. Self-harm gives them the ability to do that. That's what happens. That's why it goes sometimes unrecognized in corporate entities, because these people are really high functioning achievers, actually. They are not the type that you'll recognize just by spotting them. So when they tend to dissociate from their emotions so often, self-harm is one way to feel it. It's one way to know that that I'm alive, that I'm there. It's not usually only a way to reach out to someone for attention, but it's a way to reach out to the self for attention as well. It's a way for the self to say, hey, wake up, I need help. I need help where I want to feel my emotions, and I want someone else to validate those emotions. So self-harm has multiple prongs, multiple reasons it happens. For each
Do we
individual, it's
talk
different.
enough about it?
We
Again,
don't.
why don't we talk about it? How do we reduce the stigma related with, let's take self-harm first and then we take suicide separately. How do we reduce the stigma related with talking about self-harm? Let's take the talking about it first. Why don't we talk about it? What are we scared of?
I think primarily it's also the person, see, when a person tries to attempt suicide, it's often very in your face, and they're ready to take help. Any conversation that you open up with somebody who's suicidal will often be taken positively, not the case with self-harm. There's a lot of shame associated with it. A lot of shame. The person, like I said, is high functioning, is usually pretty competitive, is usually pretty good at their work. So they don't want to really admit that they're doing anything wrong. So partially self-harm is something even family members don't like to call out. They avoid it. And the person would wear long sleeves, as Swarnima said, because they, they try to hide whatever injuries they've done. If a caring individual gets to know about self-harm also, it may be taken as an attack and the person may just get angry. But that doesn't mean we don't talk at all. We shy away or be quiet. In fact, we have to open up conversation, and that's when the person who you talk to will maybe react with defensiveness, but they may go back and take help. So any help is good help when it comes to suicide and self-harm. The unfortunate thing is that in India, we have a lot of cultural stasis, a lot of inertia. We don't want to take that step ahead. We think it will be solved on its own. It will somehow just go away. Conversations are never opened up, or then we are very awkward in asking people these things. That is true of our country and true of our population.
Swarnima?
Yeah, I think it's, it's not just maybe about, like the topic of today, suicide and self-harm is very noticeably hard to talk about. But there are so many things which are, things like depression, anxiety, things like, oh, I didn't get that promotion that I was up for, things like I'm having a fight with my wife, or I'm feeling angry, or I'm feeling sad or upset. I think there is so much censoring that happens, censoring of the self, and in conversation with colleagues, where we don't open up about anything negative which we might be feeling or going through. We're not okay to talk about and to listen to, what we call negative emotions, anxiety, sadness, disappointment, failure. If you look at, social media, participation on social media, what's rewarded in organizations, everything is very achievement oriented. Everything is oriented towards what's shiny and bright and happy in somebody's life. I think increasingly spaces to talk about moments when you're not shiny, moments when you're uncertain, afraid, vulnerable, when things haven't gone the way you like. I think we maybe need to start having those conversations, listening to people when they express those emotions to us, and gradually pave the way to having more, uncomfortable conversations like self-harm, like suicide.
Thank you. I think that's, you've really, I think, touched on many elements here in terms of, I think today we are a society which loves the, as you put it, the shiny, the nice part of it. We don't like the not nice stories. We want to hear happy stories. And that's where I feel social media is also playing its role, in the sense this immediate gratification that we want. How many likes have you got to a post? How many forwards have I got to a post? It's that all that instant gratification, I think, that's coming up, which is in many ways boosting you. If you don't get it, then, the entire, it's like a balloon that's been pricked, I think. Abhovi, you want to come in?
Yeah, definitely. I think, the social dilemma, when I watched that series on Netflix, it opened up my eyes to so many things, how we are puppets literally to social media. And there was a line in it that stayed with me, which says that if you're not paying for something, or for a product, then that means you are the product. That means your strings are being pulled and you don't realize it. Everything from the likes that you're getting to the adverts that you're seeing, your human brain is being conditioned to become a culture that pays attention too much to skin color, to dressing, to appearance, to achievements, as Swarnima said. We are being brainwashed into that and believing that's the way life should be led. A lot of the values that we have spent so many years building up, they are somehow now disintegrating, and we need to get back to them. And as I said, in this time in 2020, we are stuck in a place where technology has boomed us. We don't know how to handle it. We don't know how to teach our youngsters to handle it. And it's a place where a lot of change has to happen. So we'll see maybe 20 years down the line when we look at all the mistakes we are making today. But as we are making them, let's be aware that it's coming at a cost. Hopefully, as our future generations come in, they'll learn from our mistakes and they'll understand that navigating around social media, this whole culture of competition and achievement somewhere has to give way to basic human values. It can't continue this way at all. I often feel that the mental health problems have become far worse, primarily because of our inability to handle these forms of communication.
And also,
one thing
what Swarnima mentioned about negative emotions, that we very rarely want to address negative emotions. We want to look at things which are happy. We don't want to look at anger, fear, sadness. Yeah, Swarnima, you were saying.
This word that Havovi used, like cost, I think it's maybe also about what are the real world consequences of admitting that vulnerability to a colleague or to a manager. What happens next? What happens after I open up? What happens after I share? A, does my organization have policies that protect me and protect my rights as an employee? B, how have other such similar incidents or disclosures been handled by my manager or by my team? Has the person been shunned or seen as, oh, we can't give any responsibility to them because, you know, their credibility is suspect or their competence is now suspect because they are depressed or anxious or going through something? I think it's also about what are the real world consequences of confessing to vulnerability, and how as people, as a team, we can be accountable to each other, how we can create accommodations for people who are not doing well for whichever reason. And that's, I think, where the HR or where you know, mental health professionals within an organization can really step up to help draft those policies, to help, you know, make sure that they're implemented, to provide training to managers, to provide training to some people within the team who could be maybe volunteers.
Let me be devil's advocate here. Okay, so I think I've been devil's advocate right through, if not the devil. So, I mean, the question here, I mean, that comes to my head, you know, it's a high pressure society. Okay, companies are accountable to their shareholders for the profits. So who's going to look at mental health of people working in that company? I mean, and people are expendable. So, I mean, what are we talking about?
Yeah. For me, I think that's where this dichotomy that we all live in comes in, you know, the us versus them. Like, I'm a mental health professional, I'm not a patient, this will never happen to me. I'm healthy, I have full use of my body and mind, this will never happen to me. And I think the more we inhabit that mindset that this is their problem and not my problem, I think the more we inhabit that space is where we start othering people or shunning people or leaving them by the wayside. Because this is, you know, like where you said, should organizations talk about this? So I think where we have people's problems. You know, where you have a mind, you have mental health and mental illness. So today it's happening to ex-employee, tomorrow it could happen to you. So I think that's where some amount of responsibility, like we talk about corporate social responsibility to, you know, the society at large. But I think it's also about what is our responsibility to ourselves and to each other.
That's true. That's true. And I think when it comes to maybe the business world, a lot is seen in terms of how much a person is contributing financially to an organization. And if one sees that mental health issues are actually reducing the amount that they can contribute financially, forget the productivity, that may really shake people up. So mental health and, for example, depression, it leads to so many working days lost. It leads to so much financial loss, but it goes unnoticed. It goes undocumented. These things have to be made aware to organizations that it's not just a problem that's there, but a problem that's costly problem. That's first and most important, because you're so right, Dr. Sriram. Unless there's a buy-in, nobody will take any effort to do anything about it. So there has to be a buy-in. We're all humans, no? And finally, we're all capitalists to some extent. That's where our country is going and is. And that's fine because it needs to develop, it needs to grow. However, it is unfortunate that as we are paying so much attention to the economy and making it grow, if we are not paying attention to the people building that economy, at some point this is going to slap us back in the face. Let's not be in a fool's paradise about that. We have to invest in people. We cannot just invest in products. We cannot just invest in how it looks outside and how many clients we have. We have to start investing in people, because that's what is showing up as crisis today. Look at where we are with the pandemic. Primarily, that's because of the lack of investment in our actual wealth, which is the people of the country, which is their health, their mental health. Look at the abysmal budget we have for mental health, and in that, the budget that we have for mental health. Now, isn't that really hitting us in the face? So I feel somewhere or the other, if we don't pay attention to these things, they do come back to us, and they come back in a bad way. However, like I said, the changes don't have to be huge. They can be very tiny changes that can happen in any organization and can start off at the very ground level. Just basic discussions, opening it up, making the culture a lot more free. That's more than enough to start with.
So how can the conversation of empathy start in organizations?
I think maybe from just a position of curiosity, that if we notice, instead of assumption of negligence or incompetence or blame, to start with curiosity. If we notice somebody not doing as well, if we notice somebody who's usually participative in a meeting or a Zoom call being quieter, if we notice productivity falling, mistakes happening, I think it's a good idea to have a question that, how are you doing? What's going on with you? Rather than a list of complaints or saying that, I noticed you didn't do this in this week. What's going on?
Which is what we tend to do, isn't it?
Yeah. So maybe just starting with that position of curiosity, I think that's the first step, maybe. Asking what's going on rather than assuming that something is going on.
Or passing the buck on to someone else to do that job. Like this is only something the HR should do, or only a certain portion of the HR should do. It can be something everyone can do. And it's much easier. I was reading in the papers that the managers these days have become a lot more easy with their employees after the pandemic, and the employees can actually start talking more to their managers. Same way, I think the same culture can continue even after the pandemic, no? Because we are all in a place where we are scared right now. It starts increasing our levels of understanding the stress we are all in, because we are all in the same boat. But that little bit can continue even post this crisis has gone. And as Swarnima said, just a simple question, how are you doing, or what's happening, a little curiosity, that can be magical, in fact.
I think one other thing I'd like to add is about the boat. I think maybe all of us don't have the same boat. Again, anecdotally speaking, a friend of mine, her boss is somebody who's, again, a senior person in the organization, is somebody with a wife, is somebody who gets his hot lunch served to him at his desk every day. So he can afford to have back-to-back meetings with maybe a 10-minute gap between them. Whereas my friend is somebody who's cooking meals, not just for herself, but also for her husband and in-laws. So for her to do back-to-back meetings is that much more challenging. So maybe to ask each employee what your boat looks like, what your responsibilities look like. Do you have people at home who are in need of care? How is your spouse somebody who's working? How are you guys delegating and supporting each other? So maybe being a little bit more mindful that what I can do is maybe something that you can't do because your circumstances are very different. Yeah.
And that basic curiosity doesn't really happen automatically.
It has to be done with intention. Yeah.
So we need to dig that out.
Hopefully it should come automatically.
This is again something that I feel is important for us to address. How do we know when somebody is or has ideas about suicide? Because very often it's after the event that people say, I didn't even realize, I didn't know, kal tak to wo has raha tha, pata nahi kya hua, achanak se kya hua. Is it such an achanak thing, or is it something that, signs that are there which people miss out on? What should families look out for? One, first, what should families look out for? And then what should organizations look out for as well?
Yeah, actually they say that a person communicates their intent to die at least a week before the actual act. Whether it is done directly or indirectly, it does happen. Most of the time it's done indirectly. Nobody's going to walk up to you and say, hey, I have suicidal thoughts roaming in my head. So we don't really look for that kind of a very evident sign. It's not always that evident. Sometimes it is, sometimes. But most of the time their behavior speaks for them. Missing deadlines and meetings, for example. Whereas earlier they used to be pretty prompt with their work. Sudden, excessive quietness in meetings, withdrawing, not being there, looking spaced out, looking like they're not understanding things. Even previously, while previously they were fairly okay at what they did. Sometimes they may speak in what we call as a very indirect manner of communication. I feel low, it may be better if I ended things. I feel nobody wants me around. If I go also, nobody will miss me. These kind of things. Sometimes they take a person who was fairly okay with religion, suddenly they spike in their religious leanings. They may talk about God, they may talk about heaven a lot more than they did earlier. You didn't see that in their daily communication. then the person suddenly becomes very non-responsive to your group chats and is not, contributing to any of that. The social media posts may also hold some kind of a clue about what's happening to them. A lot of people who post these very dark messages, it would be a good idea to drop them a message and ask how are they doing, because they may be going through those very
So what should
dark
families look out for?
all these things.
How
Similar
much
to
of access do families have for things like social media posts? What should, what are the kinds of things that families should look out for?
If you hear the person talking a lot about, मेरे जाने के बाद क्या होगा? Or worrying about finances, worrying about where the important papers are kept, sharing that information with a spouse or with a child, worrying about medical expenses, saying that, I'm a burden to the family, I just create problems for you. So if there are a lot of, self-denigrating statements that you hear, or if there's a pulling back or a withdrawal, any changes in sleep, changes in appetite, irritability, or like Havovi also pointed out, like a shutting down. I think those are things that we should be concerned anyway. And then also, if we look at what the context is, so is my family member somebody who's faced a loss, a job loss, a loss of a friend? Are they really troubled by the news that's going on outside? So are there any triggers that have been there? Are there any stressors that have been there? So when we try to put these two pieces together, our observations of the person and the context, I think those can really give us clues that, okay, maybe now we need to check in.
Absolutely. As also, I think, if a person has had, as Swarnima said, a huge loss, or financially they have received a big shock of some kind, or there has been a long-standing relationship that has come to an end, or there has been with the teenagers bullying of some nature, which their other friends may know about, but as parents they come to know last. But for children, especially cyberbullying is a huge trigger. Being sucked into all kinds of cyber games, which are unhealthy, dangerous, risky. We've heard about them, they're banned now, but those were also big triggers. So for children, there is a different set of things that exist, but more or less it's across the board the same thing, whichever age group you look at. Any behavior that looks out of the ordinary does require us to be curious. And I think that inertia is something we need to get over and
But
step
what
back.
happens, like you yourself started off by saying that, look, children, adolescents, young adults don't communicate with families. So if that gulf is there, that rift is there between, I'm calling it a rift, where the inability to communicate is there with the family notices a change in the behavior. How do they get across to this person to say that, look, I'm worried? Or is it not, or is it enough to say that, look, I'm worried?
I may be wrong on this, but and I'm speaking just anecdotally, I feel that youngsters want help. It's the family that is very reluctant to sometimes reach out for help, and they take the right help the last. So the first kind of help may come from other family members who will try to talk to the child. The first kind of help may come from the family doctor who knows the entire family, so the child has no privacy, or then a teacher. But the last layer of help is finally a mental health professional, and usually it comes in when there is some, in your face sign. So conversations have to be opened up from the beginning, but they don't have to be intrusive. The parent doesn't have to necessarily be checking the phone. They know their child best, and instinctively much more than anyone across the board would know their child. So they need to trust their instinct. They need to recognize if their child is showing behaviors that seem different than earlier. They don't spy on the child, but they create that atmosphere of conversation from the beginning. That's important. And I think the things I'm saying hold true for any age group. It's the same. You may have a suicidal partner at home also, but you may not be able to ask the right questions to that person. You may be aware that your somebody you're working with, a colleague, is showing these signs, but you may feel awkward to go and ask them these things. So that is something which that little bit of stepping forward is required.
Swarnima?
Yeah, I think I would also add that, with children, often we become almost administrators. So we want to make sure that they're doing the right things at the right time in the right amount. And a lot of our communication with them could be either very critical or instructional in nature. So to maybe also recognize that, children are little persons and we need to have a relationship with them and ask them about how their day is going. I think that's the first foundation. And if you've noticed that your child is showing any of these warning signs, to maybe just say, take them out and maybe go for a walk one-on-one, or just sit together, maybe play a game with them, maybe cook a meal with them, do some one-on-one activity, and just give openings to ask about how things are going with friends, how things are going at school, and don't jump in with advice or don't jump in with suggestions about what you think they should be doing. Allow them to tell you what they're doing and offer help, that if there's anything I can do, or just offer, just tell them that you love them and you care about them, even if, they're not doing well or they're struggling with something. Just, assure them that you're there with them.
There's a question that's come up from the audience, and I must ask that, which again linked to the kinds of things that we are talking about. What are the chances of somebody who is, having suicidal thoughts, suicidal ideation, going to open up to talk to you about it if you ask him or her that, what's wrong? Why should
I think there's a very, why should they talk?
Are they going
Actually,
to talk?
They are waiting to talk. One of the biggest myths that our community doesn't reach out for help is that, one, if we talk to a person who is contemplating suicide or who is not contemplating it, we put the idea in their head. Or if we talk to them, they'll get angry and cut the relationship off. Or if we talk to them, then we will be responsible if they do something wrong. So these are the reasons we don't reach out, whereas enough and more evidence is shown from people who have attempted suicide but have survived. They tell us that when they reached out, or when people reached out to them, that is what really helped them out. And oftentimes they themselves give signals to others, but people either discarded that by saying, oh, it's all in your head, or don't think about it, God will take care of it, this is fine. So people who are contemplating or have attempted suicide and have survived will usually say over and over again that I wish someone had reached out to me. This is what many gatekeeper programs also talk about, that we need to bust the myths that people have, that the community has around suicide, that talking about it is actually wrong. Hushing it up will just make the problem better. But it's the opposite. The more we talk, the more lives we save. And that is becoming more and more evident in research.
So, Shyam, I hope we've answered your question. Yes, Swarnima.
I would just like to add one thing. I think it's also about a time and place. So if you're crossing each other in the corridor and you see somebody not doing well and you stop them and you ask them, how are you doing? That's great. And that does have it serves the purpose of making sure the person is seen and feels acknowledged, but also maybe, schedule a time. Can we catch up over coffee at the end of the workday? So make sure you're creating a setting that allows for that disclosure to take place.
Which
if
is
you
genuine.
are rushed, exactly. And if you are rushed and they are rushed, that's not going to happen.
Correct.
Another question that's come up from the audience, does all suicidal ideation result in suicide?
No.
No.
I think it's also about maybe normalizing suicidal thoughts, that these are thoughts that all of us have, at the end of a frustrating day while working on something. I think this is something everybody feels. But if it's something that you notice yourself feeling persistently, if you notice yourself, saying it in your head or out loud over and over again, or really making plans or thinking about how you would do it, gathering those means together, making plans for what would happen after, I think those are those warning signs which indicate that it's become
All
more than
suicidal ideations don't head towards suicide.
no.
No way.
All normal people at some point do think about taking their lives. Yeah, but it has to be persistent. It has to be combined with a lot of other signs as well. However, our concern should be there in any case. And being concerned doesn't have to come with a price tag. No? It can, it's just as humans, concerned for each other.
There was another question that had come up about work-life balance. So, how do we address work-life balance? Because I think, from the things that you mentioned, Swarnima, and also you, Havogi, in terms of how the COVID situation has resulted in this, the strange situation, which is work from home, which has resulted in multiple boundaries being not respected, being broken. So how do we ensure some kind of work-life balance?
So I think first is we have to understand that what we are going through in this pandemic is not really stress. Stress is pretty temporary. It comes with demands. We meet those demands and the stress goes away. It's when stress is continual that it results in what is known as strain. And that's what's happening to us all here. It's a form of a burnout strain, which is consistently a helpless situation not getting better and no end in sight. That kind of strain requires a different kind of coping than we would have earlier. Most of our coping was very much inbuilt into our structure, right? We knew that our morning routine was a particular way, then we'd leave for work, we'd come back. Structure was built into our day. There's no structure, there's no boundary. A day without structure and boundaries usually is enough of a problem to manage because you have to set those structures for yourself. That's added pressure. And, all of the things that we used to think of as giving us, let's say, self-care, like say maybe taking a short 2-day break on a weekend, all those things are changing now. So we have to realign also the way we are looking at breaks. For today, in this pandemic age, the break that we may need is actually a break from screens. It may not be just outside the home because the screens are what are creating the strain the most. So we have to redefine.
There's also the fear, right? That if I take a break from the screen means taking a break from work. So what's going to happen to my work output? So coming back to the issue that look, mera naukri ka kya hoga? Am I going to put my job at risk because of the fact that look, मुझे 10 minute का मौका दे देना, मुझे सांस लेना है.
वही तो है. Swarnima, you want to say something?
Yeah, I think I just want to add that this is where when we're setting goals for ourselves, whether you're a manager, whether you're a team deciding on a goal for yourself, please be more mindful and sensitive that your targets may not always be what they were in normal circumstances, because we are, like Havovi said, these are not normal circumstances. And I think it's also about being an advocate for yourself, and as a manager, being an advocate for your employees about needing time off, because work will take care of itself in the sense that work advocates for itself. Work will automatically make sure it gets done because there are so many people who are invested in making sure it gets done. So whether you do it or a team member does it or a boss does it, you will have emails, reminders to make sure that calm ho jayega. But there is nobody to advocate for you to take that 10-minute break from your laptop or to go for a walk or to make sure you spend time with your family. I think those are things we need to be more mindful of advocating for ourselves, because there's nobody in the system to do that for us.
I think let's take a couple of more of the audience questions. Thank you all, audience, for being so responsive. I can see the questions coming in, and I think we've been trying to address questions alongside. It's been great. Okay, so this is a question. Why is it that most psychology experts or counselors don't promote spirituality among people? Because again, the person speaks from personal experience. I personally feel that being spiritual can make you very less prone to anxiety and depression.
My personal take on it would be, I think it's a consequence maybe of our training and of our personal beliefs as well. So when you're training, you don't usually have as much emphasis given on spirituality as you have on different models and theories of psychology. And we graduate keeping those beliefs intact as, what's professional or what we have to offer. So I think that would be my take about why I personally would not, or have not yet given that much attention to spirituality. Havovi?
So, yeah. I would say, as a therapist, it's not like spirituality doesn't become a part of therapy at some point. Everyone's beliefs are very valid. It's just that I see first a difference between excessive rituals and religion and spirituality. These two things are usually confused, but they are very different. If the religion and religious beliefs, the extra work on rituals and all of that is interfering with mental health, as it happens with some cases of anxiety disorders, I'd call it out, because obviously that's counterproductive to the work that is being done in sessions. Spirituality, on the other hand, is a form of discovery. It's an understanding of yourself internally. And I have never come across any therapist saying that you should not want to know about yourself from inside. The term you use may be different. Maybe I'd use a psychological term to depict it. You'd use some other term from any religious scripture that you've read. As long as whatever you are using for yourself is not causing a problem to your mental health. The same holds true for meditation as well. You can't just tell anyone go and do meditation. You know, a person with bipolar disorder or schizophrenia is going to have symptoms erupt when meditation is brought into their daily life. So we need to be cautious and careful and balance out the belief with the mental health parameters that the person is seeking help for.
Great, thanks. So spirituality is, if it works for you, great. It doesn't have to work for everybody. You need to decide. So for the ones for whom spirituality works, definitely continue with it, but it's not something that we can see as something one shoe fits all.
Yeah, it's not like one size fits all. Absolutely correct.
So there's another question here. Overthinking is something that is uncontrollable for me. I'm reading it out verbatim in the question. It goes off sometimes. I feel better, then it comes back. How to permanently overcome this? Could you please tell?
I think maybe you don't have the expectation from yourself that you would be able to permanently fix or cure something. Maybe let's start with a more achievable goal firstly. And I think the other thing is, building or training yourself to catch yourself in the act. But have I been ruminating or thinking about this one issue and now it's been 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 15 minutes? The more we can train ourselves to catch us in the act, I think that's something that helps break a cycle that you don't want to perpetuate. So I think that's what I would focus on.
Also overthinking often counterintuitively, overthinking is not overthinking. A person engages in overthinking when they are avoiding thinking about something which is uncomfortable. So the root cause of most overthinking would be some anxiety which the person wants to avoid. And oftentimes when we sit down and we really reason with ourselves, we are honest with ourselves, we'll understand what's troubling us inside, which we are trying to now avoid through this, constant rumination about other matters. If you are constantly ruminating and over worrying and not taking action, then that's going to only feed into the worry a little more. So I always say that the thinking and the action should be in balance. Otherwise, you're just going to end up very frustrated, very anxious. So whatever you're thinking about, try and put that in action. Do even a small step, and you'll notice that the level of overthinking will fall 50%. And try and identify what you're really worried about, because that will be at the root somewhere.
Thank you. A couple more questions. If a colleague is having an obvious mental breakdown and I've informed the family, however, the family is not willing to accept that there is a mental health issue, what should I do next?
I think, often we assume that when it comes to an ally is usually a family member. But an ally can be anybody. An ally could be a close friend, it could be a colleague, it could be a manager, it could be somebody from the HR, it could be a mental health professional. So I think maybe if we look for other allies in the support system of this individual, maybe have a conversation with them about who else do you trust, who else do you feel has your best interests at heart, who do you feel comfortable opening up to, how can I help, what can I Can I help you by providing you resources to mental health professionals? Can I help you by maybe going with you for your first appointment? Can I help you schedule an appointment? So basically offer whatever help and support we in our capacity can provide.
You're telling me something very important, that family doesn't always have to be the helpful resource. The
Often
family
it
can
may
be the
not be.
cause of, often it
Yeah.
may not be.
In fact,
So
it may
maybe
be a
that's-
non-helpful, resource. So what the person needs, as Swarna said, is more important than anything else. Maybe they don't have support anywhere else, and you might be the only support at that time. And just going with the therapist office and waiting outside while they're in the session, oh my, that can be, I can't tell you how hugely helpful it is to people. Just to have one person from their a colleague or a friend they've met. It doesn't take much for us to do that, but for the opposite person who's suffering that day in and day out, those difficult thoughts, it can mean the world to them.
Yeah.
We're going to take two last questions. So this is one which again I'm going to read out back to him. If a person seems troubled, is it safe to ask if they're thinking of hurting themselves? If not directly, what are the questions that we can ask someone to get to know about the suicidal thoughts that they have?
So I think it's important to maybe ask this question directly, but also ask it in a staggered way. So it may not be the first question you ask somebody. You might just start with, how are you doing? Or I've noticed you're not yourself in these last few weeks. Would you like to, meet for coffee? Would you like to take some time out to talk? Just maybe building it and saying, how have you been worried about something? Has there been something on your mind? Have you had any negative thoughts? Have you had any thoughts about hurting yourself, harming yourself? Have you had any thoughts of suicide? So we might want to layer and build upon the conversation rather than point blank asking them this question. I think that's what I would say.
Also, Sarima, to carry on what you had said a little time back, it's the context that matters, where you are talking about, the room that you choose, the approach that you choose.
Yeah.
Definitely not in front of others, preferably not over chat, preferably in person, because over chat, people 99% of the time everything's okay, since they can hide behind technology and their facial expressions are not visible. Also, it's important that when you are initiating this conversation and say the response is yes, then are you prepared? If they say yes, I'm thinking of killing myself, are you prepared? And we as a responsible society can be prepared. All you have to do is research and see what are the helpline numbers available, what kind of, who are the people that you can look out for help for, because you're helping yourself also. It's not just about, opening up the conversation, but holding it and holding that space for the individual, which can be very frightening for a layperson to do. Suppose someone says, yeah, you caught me in time, I was just going to go back home and do something. Are you prepared for that shocking statement? So be kind to yourself also. You may receive this kind of a positive response from the person opposite. It's always better to be prepared, to have some resources handy, to not react with shock, but to continue the process of empathy. It will be helpful to you and the person opposite.
Thank you. And just
to add one more thing. If the person is in that moment, like Havovi said, contemplating that I was just going to, we might want to just stay with them on the phone. So the longer you can delay the impulse, or the thought of doing something from the action of carrying it out, the more the impulse fades away. So you might, help them to delay that impulse for now and then subsequently reach out to other resources like a helpline or a trained mental health professional or hospitalization if needed. So I think it's about creating that space between thought and action. Yeah.
So in that note, I will also say the handout that has been very thoughtfully put together by Swarnima and Hobi looks at resources that organizations can approach, organizations, individuals, families can approach if they need help. Okay, these are essentially, I would call them crisis services that are there. They offer counseling by chat, by phone, by email. So multiple modalities that are there, and it's essentially the cost of one phone call. Please, if anybody needs to access these services, please feel free. The handout is downloadable. So I think on that note, we need to wind up this session. Thank you so much, Avobi and Swarnima. It's been a very enriching conversation, and I think it's been extremely illuminating for me, definitely, and I hope for the audience as well. Nisha, over to you.
Thank you indeed. I must say, what an insightful, discussion. A lot of aspects that we think is, understood and taken for granted, which we really need to think again about. So thank you indeed, Havovi, Swarnima, and Dr. Sriram for having orchestrated the entire discussion so beautifully. Dear participants, we have shared a link for your feedback. It's very important that you share your feedback with us. We hope you would have accessed it in the chat section. And just for your information, these were the 2 sessions that we have completed earlier today. And the link to the calendar has also been shared with you. Very interesting, insightful discussions like the one you've just been a part of await you whole of this week. So please do register, urge your team members, colleagues, everyone in your circle of contacts to register for this very valid and vital aspect of the kind of times that you and I are in currently. Also, we urge you to visit our website, which is nationalhrd.org. Become a member and not just benefit, but share the knowledge and the expertise that each of you have within yourselves. Thank you once again. We look forward to welcome each of you for yet another session starting tomorrow and an entire series lined up for you. Thank you all. Take care. Stay safe. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Nisha. Thank you,
Thank
Swarnima and
you.
Avobi, and thank you all the
Thank
audience.
you. Thank you, Nisha. Thank you, Dr. Sriram. Bye-bye.